Good evening and welcome to this week's very exciting episode of Mr. Piggy Talks. And this week we're going to be talking about a very, very popular subject for model railway or railway enthusiasts. And the subject is the Inter-City 125, otherwise known as the high-speed train. And this evening I'm going to discuss the model locomotive and the background history of the locomotive itself, and if we get time we'll have a sort of exciting run of it in action on the model railway itself. Now I think I'll probably start this evening by talking about the history, a brief sort of synopsis background history of the 125. Now the Intercity 125 has had various class nomenclatures applied to it over the years. When it first started, it was the class 253, we had a 254 and a 255, and then for much of its life, however, it's been known as the class 43. And it is a diesel electric locomotive that's run as a set of two power cars and anything from 6 to 9 intervening coaches. And the 125 originally came into service in 1976. And it was a groundbreaking locomotive at the time, designed to improve the high-speed running services of express passenger trains across the network, because at the time things were literally getting overtaken by motor transport, and the maximum speed a diesel electric locomotive of the time could do on passenger services, as we spoke last time, was officially 100 miles an hour. And the 125 derivation was meant to say, well, look, we're going for bust here because we want to improve that speed up to 25% and get them able to run at 125 miles an hour. The key to that, of course, was how were we going to improve the high-speed service with comfort, of course, not people simply thrown around and rattling around in old rolling stock. And most European governments were actually updating their existing rail infrastructure. So, for example, high-speed tracks were being laid. TGV in France, for example, intervening bridges that were getting in the way were going to be sort of removed. The actual landscape of the track itself was going to be run straight, and so it could have a lot of high-speed running. In Britain, that really wasn't possible, mainly financially, because at the time in the 1970s, the country was broke, pretty much it is now, of course, and also we don't have a lot of space here for that kind of thing. So, if you want to start, straightening lines that go through towns and villages and sidings, that kind of thing attached to them, is simply an enormous undertaking. It would require swallowing up a lot of land, compulsory purchase, that kind of thing. So actually, improving the track layout is a major undertaking, and of course that was seen later on with the Eurotunnel trades, the Eurostars, where just that was done in Kent in the 1980s, with immense public protest along the way. Anyhow, that was the idea. Was we were going to up the speeds 125 miles an hour on existing rail infrastructure without a lot of expensive and time-consuming sort of changes and alterations to it. And it was designed to compete with motor transport, because in the 1970s, if you wanted to get from one city to another, the first call was your motor car. It was easy, and the motorways were new and fast and exciting, and railways just weren't. They couldn't compete with that. So the existing class 52s, if for example diesel hydraulic locomotives on the western region, really weren't sort of competing with that modernity anymore. So that was the idea of the 125. And then just moving on quite quickly, as part of that process, the government was actually hoping that the advanced passenger train was the future, and that the HST or the 125 was more or less an interim design to sort of carry us forward. Well, we all know what happened in reality is that the advanced passenger train didn't come to fruition. the tilting mechanisms and the technology just was a little bit too advanced of its time and was somewhat unpredictable and reliable. And the advanced passenger train withered on the vine, but the HST, the 125, didn't. It carried on, and it carried on for many, many years. We're talking about the mid-70s, and they're still in use now in limited numbers here as well. So it's an interesting fact that there were only 95 of these units built. They had a power car at each end. There were only 95 of them built, but they were so ubiquitous in the end over the whole of the network that you would imagine there'd be far more than that. But there were only in fact 95 of them, the Class 43s, and they had a very exciting look to them. So I've got a model of one here, and I'll show you. This is actually the Lima original BR livery from the 1970s, Lima edition model. You've got the classic yellow and blue and grey livery, but here it is. And if you can just look at that, that really is quite something. It's very modern. Looks a lot more modern than what we were talking about last time, the Deltic. It's streamlined. It's got a sort of lovely sort of contoured cab. The livery itself was actually very modern. If you can see that the actual whole look of it was streets ahead of what we had at the time. So I was a schoolboy at the time, the mere thought of this was terribly exciting. It was streets ahead, light years ahead of what we'd already got. And originally, I should say that the prototype only had space for one person in the cab. Now, if we go back to the 1970s, those of you can remember, trade unions had a lot of clout, and they didn't like this idea of reducing the numbers of crew on trains. It was sort of reducing the jobs that they were trying to protect, and they weren't very happy about that. In the end, the chap who designed the livery actually redesigned the whole cab arrangement itself, and the actual cab area became bigger, enlarged, more space, and eventually there was space for another seat. And that sort of managed to keep ASLEF, the train drivers union, happy. So they were much more now willing to cooperate with the introduction of this locomotive, as there was now space for 2 crew members in the cab rather than just the one. Although, of course, in the end, they were only driven by one person at a time anyway. But it was just a bit of interesting trade union history there. So here is the Lima locomotive. I should mention what were they powered by. So there were 2 of these power cars. Here's another one, although in obviously the model derivatives, there's only a motor in one of them. There were 2 of these power cars at either end of the train, and they were powered by a Paxman Valenta diesel electric locomotive on a Bobo bogie arrangement. The actual diesel electric engine is in this part here with the grills. It was immensely powerful. It was 2,250 horsepower. Also, if you've got 2 units on a train, you're doubling that, so you've now got just shy of 5,000 horsepower, locomotive power on your train, and that's where, of course, this extra oomph came from to give you this 125 miles an hour maximum speed. They first came into service on the Western region, and for those of you who are lucky enough to be living in Bristol or Cardiff in South Wales, you were the first guys who got to try them out. I can remember when I was a child being at Padding Station with my mother and seeing these 125s on other platforms, but sadly they weren't going to where I was going to in Plymouth. That came much later, or a few years later, but actually the original services were going to Bristol and South Wales. And I think, oh damn, if only I could live in Bristol, I could go on these things. But there we go. Obviously it wasn't to be. But later, of course, they became pretty ubiquitous. I would imagine virtually anyone of my vintage and era will have travelled on a 125 probably many, many times. Indeed, I have, because they really were very, very modern. I should mention the coaches. Now, they had their own purpose designed coaches for them, and these were called BR Mark IIIs. They were fully air conditioned. They had electric internal doors, obviously to keep the atmosphere within the air conditioned unit. They were very modern. There was lots of window space. There was lots of space to spread out while you were sitting in these things. And of course, there were no compartments anymore. So they were much safer. They were more open. You had first class and second class, and you also had, if you like, a sort of renaissance of the buffet car. Those of you who remember these were delightful things. So the restaurant and buffet car, there was a specialist carriage just for that, and there was a buffet unit towards this end. If you could possibly, by turning around that way, this is where you queued up for your coffees and your drinks and your snacks. For those of you a little bit better off, there was a restaurant car section here, and full 3-course meals were served in these things. I myself, having sat down to quite a number of them in the past, sadly no more. But also, wonderful cooked breakfasts if you're getting on a very early top link service. There were cooked breakfasts to be had. Beautiful white damask tablecloths. The stewards very much looking after you, and a chef working at it in this galley kitchen here, and it's really some quite spectacular meals were cooked up in there. It was really quite something. And it was really, if you like, a renaissance of the restaurant car service, which prior to that had deteriorated terribly. If we remember, we were talking about last time the British Rail sandwich, the British Rail pork pie, the pickled onions, all that kind of stuff. It was really rather dire before these things came out. You probably wouldn't want to eat them at all. But when this happened, wow, we were back to where we were, in years gone by, in the 20s and 30s, when dining in a train was really quite something. It was a real pleasure. It wasn't just to sort of fill you up until you got home. It was, you had a proper dinner, and copious amounts of alcohol was available too, if you were that way inclined. So these brand new modern coaches, they were safe, of course. They were very safe coaches that weren't going to fall apart in an accident. That would save many lives in the years to come. And they really were quite something. So a trip on a 125, was modern. It was swift. It was sleek. It sounded great. It was powerful. It was glued to the rails. You really weren't even aware you were travelling at a high speed. It was really quite an experience. And in a way, you were sort of sad to get off when you got to your home destination. You're a bit disappointed. I wish it could have got carried on a bit longer. It's that kind of experience. It's difficult to imagine that these days, isn't it? With transport at the moment, it's not quite like that anymore, sadly. So there we are. So I should also mention that Hornby were the first to produce a scale model in 00 scale. And here it is, the Hornby scale model catalogue, 00 scale, 1977. And right on the front page of that, soaring towards you, if you can see, at high speed, is the Hornby 253001. I know at least one of my regular viewers had a 253001 in 1977 when this thing came out, and he's still got it. I'm very proud of it. He is too. I say hang on to that, because 253001 is a pretty special locomotive, and the original is really rather nice. The Hornby ones came with lights. If you can, obviously there are headlights on these things. Came with lights on both ends of the train, depending on which direction you went. The Lima ones didn't. They were only initially in the power car, and later they just didn't bother with it at all. There must have been some problems with it, and there were no lights either front or back, which caused a bit of confusion, dismay. And so these trains, as I said, were produced by the rival manufacturers at the time. You have Hornby with the first out of the stable, with their Ringfield motor powered 125. I have to say, and we other enthusiasts have discussed this recently, that when I got mine, I think I got mine about 1979. I was a bit late in getting mine. I sort of put it on my track and I thought, oh, it's going to be so fast. Oh, it wasn't. I'm afraid Hornby has all rather let us down, because I had the very reliable Ringfield motor. There's something about the way they geared it with the bogies and stuff that it wasn't very fast at all. It sort of, and it was almost a little bit asthmatic. But the Lima one was as always. The Limas were sort of you knew where you were with a Lima locomotive. Their electric motor was pretty full on. You always knew it was going to do the business. Another thing that Hornby got really rather badly wrong, in my opinion, is that they shortened the Mark III coaches. So if you see the Mark III coaches as built were very, very long. They were the longest coaches, I believe, that were in service at the time. And because of that, they have trouble going around, anything less than third radius curves. Okay, and because of that, Hornby wanted you to be able to put them on your first and second radius. They go around on second radius, okay, but first radius they don't, because they're just too long and they sort of look rather odd on a sharp curve. So Hornby truncated and made them rather short, and I think that was a bit of a pity because they just didn't look right then. Whereas Lima kept theirs. They started off at the right length and they stayed there too. So I think that was a bit of a disappointment, trying to appease us younger modelers with our perhaps shorter layouts. But in the end, it'd be much better if they stuck to the accuracy, I feel. But anyway, that's a matter of opinion. I think I've done probably enough talking now. So just time now to go to the layout for a quick spin and see one of these beauties in action. So join me now. Many thanks. Bye-bye. Right, here we are on the layout with the 125 ready to go. This is the Lima 125 in original BR Inter-City livery. That's the blue, yellow and grey. This one is carrying a rake of Mark III carriages, as we discussed last time. Building up a bit of speed here. So first class at the front, followed by a buffet, followed by two second class Mark III, or standard class I should say, Mark III coaches. They got rid of the second class. We have first and standard, as we do indeed today. So here she is, building up a little bit of speed. Going through the station nicely. There's obviously a fair bit of weight she's pulling, but not struggling at all. There's plenty of reserve of power still to go. Probably a bit too fast, probably. Keep it to a scale speed if we can on the curves. Coming through nicely through the station. So that, I think, does do proper justice to the real 125. It looks right. The livery colour is right. And obviously the Mark III coaches are the correct length. And the Lima versions were nicely detailed. So I think that's probably about as good as you could get. Obviously now these days it's a bit different because Hornby have brought out a very, very modern and high spec 125 model, but you have to pay for it. It's going to be £400 plus. The coaches are extremely expensive as well, because of all the whistles and bells, literally sound effects, you name it. But it comes with a hefty price tag. But if you're of my era, quite nice to have the stuff that used to work, I should say, just as well. And here is a very good example. This was bought from eBay a little while ago. Quite difficult to obtain, I should say, in good condition. But this one really is in very good condition for its age. Bearing in mind it's going to be, 40 years old, almost as old as the real thing. So that I think is a good example, and nicely running too, even all those years later. I didn't mention, of course, on the video that there was an Xbox success with the 125. Australia bought it and called it the HST, and I think they're still running. Possibly, I'm not sure. Maybe some of the viewers will tell me whether I'm right on that. But they're running it very recently, so you could see these 125s in Australia, and I believe they were slightly strange look. If you're used to seeing them chug along in, Wiltshire and Devon and Cornwall, seeing one of these in Australia is a little bit odd. But there we go. Enough said, I think. We will slow this beautiful girl down as she comes into the station. Nice slow speed running here. Not too slow. And here she comes in all her glory. The Inter-City 125.